Hi there, folks. My name is Marty Shoub, and I am a director with Return Ministries. I'm also Canadian rep for the Tikkun family of ministries from Israel. And I'm one of the prayer leaders on the altar of prayer. I lead the day 5 watch number 1. And so, of course, you're very welcome to come and join us on that time. And I want to talk to you about what is Aliyah. What is Aliyah? We talk about this, of course, a lot, and the altar of prayer is really there to enlist the body of Messiah from all over the world to pray for Aliyah. And we understand this to mean the return of the Jewish people from the diaspora, whatever country they are in, back to the land of Israel. But Aliyah is so much more than that. Of course, that's very central to the idea of Aliyah, to return back to the land of Israel. And this theme of return is very, very interwoven with this word Aliyah, but there's something else about it. So let's look in the scriptures a little bit to explore the word. Aliyah comes from the word Allah, which means to ascend, to go up. And in the scriptures, there is an orientation with respect to up and down. So I'm not sure what it's like all over the world, but at least here in North America, our geographical orientation is we go up north and we go down south. So north is up, south is down. That's a very North American perspective, but that's not a scriptural perspective. In the scriptures, there are a number of different dimensions of going up and coming down. The first one is God is up in heaven and he comes down to earth. So with respect to heaven and earth, heaven is up, we go up to heaven, we go down to earth. And also when we talk about the earth, going up is going up to Israel, and going down is going away from Israel. So I'll give you an example. Abraham, we read in Genesis 13, when there was a famine in the land, he was in the promised land, and he went down to Egypt. And when he was in Egypt and he returned back to Israel, he went up from Egypt. And we read in Exodus chapter 3 that when the Lord appears to Moses, he says, I have come down to rescue the children of Israel. So he's coming down from heaven. And I will bring them up into a good land. That is, from Egypt, he's going to bring them up to Israel. Within the land of Israel, there's also an orientation about up and down, and to go up is to go to Jerusalem, and if you're in Jerusalem, wherever you're going down. And actually, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, that's literally true. You have to go up from every direction to go to to Jerusalem, and you go down from Jerusalem. So, for instance, the very, very well-known scripture from Isaiah chapter 2, many people shall come and say, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And even in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, a number of places, in fact, every time when it speaks about Paul or one of the apostles going to Jerusalem, they're always going up. A good example is from Acts 18, verse 22. It says, when he, that is Paul, landed in Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church. And that doesn't mean he went up to Philip's house to greet the church. He went up, and it's understood that means to Jerusalem. And then he went down to Antioch. So he lands in Caesarea, goes up to Jerusalem. He's in Jerusalem. Then he goes down to Antioch. So Aliyah, the most literal understanding of the word, is to go up, and there's a biblical orientation with respect to geography about going up. One goes from any nation to Israel, you are going up. When you are in Israel, if you're going to Jerusalem from anywhere in Israel, you are going up. Paul was in Caesarea, and he went up to greet the church. So, and of course, with respect to heaven and earth, God comes down to earth, and Yeshua, of course, when he ascended, he went up. He made Aliyah, he returned home. And that's the other side to the idea of Aliyah. It's not just the literal going up, but it's this idea of return. It's the idea of exile, going down, going away, and then return, coming up, coming back. And of course, this is a central covenant promise for God's dealings with the Jewish people. That is, I'll bring you up from under the burdens of the Egyptians to a good land. But there were expectations for Israel to obey the commands of the Lord, and the ultimate consequences for disobedience for Israel was banishment, being sent away from the land. And then there's the promise of return, but I will bring you back. And over again, we read in the prophetic scriptures this promise, I will bring you back. And of course, we're going to talk a lot more about this, but just that is central to this idea of Aliyah. It's not only going up, but it's the idea of returning back to the land of Israel. And it's interesting, if you look at the scriptures, we see that there's this pattern of being sent away and coming back. We talked a little bit about Abraham, how at the end of chapter 12, we read about a famine in the land, and so Abraham goes down to Egypt, he goes away, and then he returns. In chapter 13, he comes back up to the land of Israel. So he returns back and forth. Also, we read about the other patriarchs, that they have a return story too. Now, Isaac never leaves the land. You remember how Abraham was adamant Isaac is not to leave the land, but yet we read in Genesis 22 that in a sense, Isaac has a return story, because you know the story, how it goes. God says to Abraham, take your only son, your beloved son Isaac, and sacrifice him on one of the mountains, which I will show you. And so Abraham heads out with his son and a couple of young lads who are servants who accompany them. And when they get to very close to Jerusalem, to Mount Moriah, and they can see it just afar off in the distance, Abraham turns to his two assistants. He says, you stay here, and the lad and I will go, and we will worship, and then we will return to you. And of course, the writer of Hebrews tells us that, figuratively in a sense, Abraham received Isaac back from the dead. In other words, when Abraham was taking Isaac to that altar of sacrifice, he by faith assumed that this promised heir. Even if he had to kill him, God was going to resurrect him from the dead. And figuratively, Abraham received him back. And prophetically, Abraham spoke this promise to his assistants by saying, we're going to worship and then we'll come back. He's not lying to them. He's by faith declaring that even if I have to sacrifice my son, I will receive him back. God will return him to me. And in fact, Abraham and Isaac returned back after that experience on the top of Mount Moriah. So Isaac has a return story too. Of course, we all know about Jacob's return story. Jacob tricks his dad, receives the blessing, but things are not good at home. His brother Esau wants to kill him, and his mother says, go and visit my family in Mesopotamia, and when things cool down, you can return. Well, it didn't quite work out the way Rebekah thought it would. It took Jacob 20 years and many trials to the point when he finally could return. And he returned not the deceiver, the trickster, the one who lied to his father, who stole his brother's birthright. He returns a very different man, a man transformed from Jacob the deceiver to Israel, the one who has prevailed with God and men, a prince with God. God had transformed him. And this is so important in the Aliyah story, that it's not just about going away and coming back. It's about transformation. Joseph goes down to Egypt, and he returns because he tells the children of Israel, God is going to visit you and bring you up from this place, and you are to take my bones with you. And when Israel left Egypt, and that's this huge return story, right? The whole nation goes down to Egypt and comes back, but Joseph came up with them. Moses also, he leaves, goes to Midian, and then he comes back to Egypt, and then he comes out of Egypt with all the rest of the children of Israel. David, he has to leave and comes back to Jerusalem. Of course, Yeshua, when he was a child, he and his parents had to flee, and they went down to Egypt and returned. So you see this pattern over and over again in the lives of the patriarchs and the lives of very significant biblical heroes of faith, that they have very often a story of going out, sometimes going out in exile, and then returning back. Now, when we talked about Jacob, I mentioned that when Jacob went out, he went out as Jacob, the heel grabber, the deceiver, and he came back a transformed man. Remember, just before he crossed over into the promised land, he spent the night wrestling with a man and would not let go until he blessed him. And the man said to Jacob, "What is your name?" And Jacob said, "I am Jacob." Jacob acknowledged who he was, and in humility he recognized who he had been. But 20 years working for his uncle Laban had really taken the rough edges off Jacob, and he was no longer that proud conniver. He was a humble, grateful servant of God. And the man, Yeshua himself, blesses Jacob, says, "Your name is no longer Jacob, but Israel." He comes back transformed from Jacob to Israel. And we see that this is a real key part of Aliyah. Aliyah is to go up. And yes, this is the idea of coming from the diaspora back to Israel, but also there is this upward vertical dimension to Aliyah. And you find when you look at the prophetic scriptures that when the prophets talk about transforming Israel, when the prophets talk about the new covenant, when the prophets talk about Israel being filled with the Holy Spirit, it's always connected to the idea of Israel being regathered. And there's many examples of this, but just for our purposes, I want to give you one example from Jeremiah chapter 31. We start reading in verse 27. It says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and the seed of beast. And it shall come to pass that I've watched over them to pluck and break them down and to overthrow and destroy and bring harm, that is, to bring judgment on them and to send them into exile. So I will watch over them to build and to plant, declares the Lord." And over in the book of Jeremiah, God warns of judgment, but then also promises, "But I will bring you back." And really, in these verses in Jeremiah 31, this is what God is saying as well. But then just after that, we have again a repetition of this phrase, "Behold, the days are coming." And now what do we read? "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people, and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord. They shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." So here in Jeremiah 31, as we see in many, many places, there is the promise, I will bring you back, I will replant you in the land, and then there's also this vertical dimension. And I will make a new covenant where I will write my Torah in your heart, and you will know me, and I will remember your sins no more. And the foundation of this dual dimension of Aliyah, that is to bring Israel back and to transform Israel, that is to bring them back in this direction, is not in the prophets, but in the Torah. And we'll talk about this at another time, but there is a passage in the Torah, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, that outlines God's program for Israel's return, for Israel's Aliyah. And this is what it says in Deuteronomy. This is the first 10 verses. "So after these things have come upon you, the blessings and the curse, which I've set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord has driven you," that is, afterwards, after you have been exiled and you have faced the judgments of God, and you call these things to mind, that is, you take these things to heart, is literally what it says in Hebrew, and you return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice and all that I command you today with all your heart and soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you and gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there the Lord will gather you, and from there he will take you. So that is, I think, our basic understanding of Aliyah. God promises when you are scattered in the land of your enemies, when you return to me with all your heart, I will return to you, and I will gather you from all the countries where I scattered you, even if it is the most distant land. From there I will bring you back. There's more here to this story. If we continue on reading, It says, and the Lord will make you more prosperous and more numerous than your father. So it's not just coming back, but there is this renewed blessing of prosperity and a blessing of an increase in your population. And then the next verse, verse 6, is the vertical dimension, and this is so important. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you'll love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. So Aliyah is not just about bringing Israel back, even scattered to the most distant land under heaven. It's also this idea that when you return, I will bless you. I will bless you with prosperity. I will increase your population. We certainly have seen that this has, in fact, happened with Israel's modern return. But more so, I will circumcise your heart, says the Lord. And you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and live. We're talking here about spiritual transformation. It's really saying what Jeremiah says in chapter 31. I will write the Torah in your heart, and you will know me from the greatest to the least. I will circumcise your heart, that you will love me with all your heart and soul, and you will live. It's essentially the same thing. There is the horizontal dimension to Aliyah, and there is the spiritual dimension to Aliyah. This is very, very important. We have the horizontal axis, if you will. I'll bring you back from wherever you were scattered, and I will bring you back. I will restore you. I will write my Torah on your heart. I will fill you with my Holy Spirit. I will change you from the inside out. I will circumcise your heart, that you will love me with all your heart and soul and live. And the important thing here to remember is that this is not just the prophetic word to Israel. This is the covenant God made with Israel. This is the covenant that cannot be broken. Yes, there are consequences for failure to obey the covenant. The consequences are exile, but the covenant is not broken because Israel is disobedient. God promises, even if you're scattered to the most distant land under heaven, from there I'll bring you back. And not only that, I will change your heart so that our relationship will change. As Jeremiah says, and they will all know me. And as the covenant says in Deuteronomy 30, and you will love the Lord your God with all your soul, all your heart, and you will live. Now, this covenant promise of return is also found in Leviticus chapter 26, which is, if you're familiar with that passage, the passage on blessings and curses, but doesn't end with the curse. It doesn't end with exile. It ends with the promise of restoration. But even behind that, we have the covenant God made with Abraham, which is unconditional, where he said, to you and your descendants, I will give this land. And we're going to talk about all these things in a lot more detail in other sessions, but I want to just make this point. Israel's return ultimately is based on God's covenant promise to Israel. It is not based on Israel's behavior. It's not based on Israel's performance. It's based on what God said he would do, not what Israel does. And I think all of us as believers can understand this, that our salvation is not based on what we do, but on what Yeshua has done for us. We're talking about the same God, the same covenant-keeping, faithful, merciful, gracious, wonderful, always good God. And His purposes ultimately depend on his good pleasure and his mercy and his love, not on our performance, and certainly also not on Israel's performance. But just like us and Israel, we all face consequences for disobedience, but ultimately God's purposes stand on God's word, on his promise, on his covenant, and this is true for Aliyah, for Israel's return. If you can get anything out of what I'm saying, this is what you should get. Aliyah is dependent on God's faithfulness, his faithfulness to his covenant, which he cannot break, even if Israel breaks covenant. And certainly he will always be true to himself. He can never break covenant. So we see in the lives of the patriarchs, there is this pattern, there's this story of exile and return. I think Jacob's story is very similar to Israel's story. Jacob does some things wrong, and it results in him having to leave. He has many hardships in his diaspora, and then God brings him back. And not only does he bring him back, but he transforms him. And there we see there's a spiritual transformation in Jacob, from Jacob to Israel. And this pattern of exile and return is repeated over and over again in the scriptures. And the point of it is this. This pattern of exile and return does not begin with the patriarchs, and it doesn't begin with the nation of Israel. It begins with humanity itself. All of us are on this Aliyah journey because all of us have experienced exile. You know, when we read about Adam and Eve in the garden and how they walked with God and how they knew each other intimately with complete oneness and transparency, and how everything went wrong when they disobeyed God and partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God made a decision because he wanted to protect humanity from reaching forth and partaking of the tree of life and living forever in a permanent state of sin that could not be redeemed. And so what did God do? We read this. It says in Genesis 3, verse 22, "Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become like one of us, in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also the tree of life and eat and live forever." The Lord was saying we can't allow that to happen because that would mean he would be permanently in this situation of being estranged from God, permanently in this situation where he could not somehow be redeemed through the death of one on his behalf. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man. He sent the man away. The man and the woman went into exile. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Aliyah is Israel's story, but Aliyah is also humanity's story. Israel has experienced exile and is in the process of returning. Humanity has experienced exile, and for those who are in Messiah, we are still also in this process of returning. Ultimately, we're all on a journey home, not just with respect to geography, but much more importantly, vertically, we are on a journey home back to the very presence and heart and oneness with our Heavenly Father, and of course, with Yeshua and with each other. And here's the thing. These are not just twin tracks that are, moving along independent of one another. Israel's story and Yeshua's story and humanity's story are all interconnected, and you can't really separate one from the other. The story of Israel's return and restoration is wrapped up in the story of Yeshua's return and humanity's restoration. So Aliyah is not just about Israel returning back to the land God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, but it's the story of redemption and return and restoration, not only of Israel, but as Peter says in Acts chapter 3, verse 21, of all things spoken of by the prophets long ago. So Aliyah is all of our story, and Aliyah is vital to all of us. It's not just about Israel and, God's going to do it and, I'm not involved. If you belong to the Messiah, if you belong to the King of Israel, if you belong to the one who is in fact bringing Israel back, it's your concern as well. But not only for that reason, but also because Israel's restoration is inextricably tied to the return of Messiah and humanity's restoration. This is our story. Aliyah is all of our story. Aliyah is all of our concern. And as those who belong to Messiah, we align ourselves with his purposes. We align ourselves with his priorities. We align ourselves with his commandments and his intentions and his will. And so we align ourselves with Aliyah because this is on the heart of the Father to bring all of God's children home. The Lord bless you, and we'll talk more about Aliyah and what it means to Israel and what it means to all of us. We'll see you later.